Hello.
Hi everyone. Welcome to Azure User Group Sundsvall, Sweden. We're back with a new session today. I hope you're having a great weekend. To those that are watching us live today.
Yes, and today we will have presentation here about Azure AD B2C from Gopal Amleka. But before we do that, we can have a quick look here at our code of conduct.
Yeah, so this is our code of conduct. You can read more about it on our GitHub link. But our purpose is to have an open and inclusive user group for everyone. So just be respectful and be nice to others. Thank you.
Yes. So then,
And we can welcome Gopal on the stage. Maybe say
yes.
hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yes. Yes, I wanted to share to the audience that Gopal and I are both mentors at Bit Project's Serverless Camp, where we're
Yes.
mentoring and teaching serverless programming with Azure Functions with the students learning it. So it's great to have him here as well in the user group.
So
Yeah,
where are
that's a
you?
great project.
Where are you tuning in from, Gopal?
So I'm from India. It's a Saturday afternoon here, I guess, and yeah, that's so. It's good to be here. I mean, in the project, I got introduced to Jonah, and we just talked about a lot of things on Azure and in ADB2C a little bit, and especially the serverless thing. And it was really good to have someone to talk about that. And then we ended up in a. She told me about this your user group. So yeah, it's really good to be here and talk about whatever I have learned in the last few months about this B2C.
Yes. Yes, it's great that the challenges that we have with the pandemic gives us the opportunity to like to share knowledge wherever we
Yes,
are. So there's no limit. So it's great. Yeah.
that's the plus
So
side of this pandemic.
yes. So do you feel ready to take the stage and share about
Yeah, I
Azure?
think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Shall we get started?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure.
Great. I
So
hope I'm sharing the screen. Right. Okay. Is my screen visible?
yes, everything looks great, Gopal.
Okay. Fantastic. So yeah, so in this session, I'm just going to do a little bit of introduction to the Active Directory B2C from Azure. And I just a disclaimer, I'm actually not an expert in this, but few months ago at work, I was trying to implement something and I came across this and it sounds quite interesting and there are a number of features and it's still evolving. So I went through a number of things in there. So I thought it's good to share the learning. So I wrote some blog posts on my blog as well. And so I'll just take you through that. I will talk about the agenda first. So the agenda is, it seems pretty long, but we'll try to cover this in 1 hour. So we'll talk about what is Azure AD B2C, why do we need that. Then I will show a very quick demo of the AD B2C in action, which is running locally. And then I'll talk about how to set it up in the Azure portal. And then I have a React.js app which is running as a locally running web application. So how to configure that app to use the AD B2C and let users sign up or sign in and sign out of your application. And depending on how we do on time, we'll just cover a bit about adding external or social identities. We'll use GitHub as an example, and we'll see how to add GitHub to the sign up screen, and then a couple of slides about what more you can do with ADB2C, not just limited to sign in sign out. So some advanced features of the B2C, and then I'll provide some links. When you really want to get started, I'll provide some links to the documentation and some code examples and my blog post. So that's the agenda. Before I get started, uh, the most difficult part, talking about yourself, I'll cover that as quickly as I can. I like to call myself as a continuous learner. I keep learning about a lot of things, and learning new things is the biggest passion for me. And I can definitely write hello world in 2 3 languages or little more number of languages. I can call myself as a polyglot. I'm a big fan of Azure Cloud, and I keep using a number of services from Azure Cloud, which is hang on. So the screen looks blurry, is it? Uh, I guess there is no other control for me. I think as we
So
move forward, that when we look at the actual ADB2C portal, that problem wouldn't be there. It
I've
could be
checked.
because of the PowerPoint.
It looks good here on my side at least.
Yeah, I'm having a look at the YouTube. Maybe it's the YouTube resolution sometimes. Okay, I think I'll keep moving. Right. Okay. So yeah, what I did was, I mean, yeah, I work in the Azure cloud, use a lot of services from the Azure cloud, and I use a lot of .NET technologies, Microsoft technologies in general to develop a number of web applications and even desktop and even some mobile applications as well using ASP.NET. And recently, past few months, I have been working with microservices based architectures. I completed architecting a full cloud native app using a few microservices running in ASP.NET on the backend and doing React.js front end to consume those APIs. So last few months I have been also teaching myself how to do front end development using React and HTML and CSS, a very different field when you are actually used to backend. And prior to that, I had worked in IoT space and embedded systems, microcontrollers programming in C, assembly, and even in the initial phase of my career, I also worked in electronic circuits for a few years. So quite a lot of things. It's way different than what I'm doing today, but that's the fun part of learning and enjoying the learning. And currently, I'm working as a software manager in a company called Crowcon Detection Instruments. It's a UK-based company. We are actually manufacturing gas detection devices. So it's a hardware company, but we are doing a lot of work on getting the data from these devices onto the web and doing a lot of IoT stuff and a lot of web and mobile applications for that. So these are a few links about me. If you want to find me, I'm on Twitter with this handle, Gopal_Amleka, and that's my blog, iotality.com, and my LinkedIn. And there is this new network called as Polywork. It's quite new. It's kind of LinkedIn, but it's quite developer friendly. So if you want to check out, I got some invite codes which we can share maybe towards the end of the session. So yeah, that's about me. Let's move forward. So what is the Active Directory ADB2C? It's basically identity as a service in Microsoft Azure, and it is focused on business to consumer applications. So B2C here stands for business to consumer or business to customer. And why that is focused here is, if you have heard of Active Directory or Azure Active Directory, that's usually the it's basically designed for the enterprise applications for having user identities within your company, within your bigger organization. But the B2C opens it up for the applications which you want to expose to your customers, your consumers. And it allows your users to sign in and do a self sign up to your applications, and be it web applications, be it even desktop or mobile applications as well. And it allows users to edit their user profile, and you can decide what data about the users you want to store and what data you want to let them edit, and even reset their password self service. And not only that, it's you can also protect your backend APIs using the ADB2C tokens that it issues. So there's a lot of applications and lot of use cases for that. It implements or it supports the implementation of these two protocols called as OAuth 2 and OIDC. So OIDC is OpenID Connect if you're new to that. Uh, Going into details of that is really a big thing. It deserves another session. But in a nutshell, OAuth 2 is a protocol for authorization. It's kind of delegated authorization to be precise, whereas OIDC is for authentication. So OIDC actually extends the OAuth protocol and implements something called as ID tokens, so you can identify users. So authentication is basically identifying your users, who that user is, and authorization is about letting them to do something, whether the user is authorized to do something, access certain parts of your app, or access certain APIs and so on. And when you really want to implement this, you don't have to implement all the protocols or all the calls on your own. Microsoft provides a number of libraries for that. Basically, the MSAL library, what is it called as? Microsoft Authentication Library. It is available for .NET and JavaScript and Java and a few other languages as well, and even React and I guess Angular as well. So you can use that library and implement the B2C in a much quicker quicker way. Right. So that's about what it is. Now it sounds a little bit of complicated, like there is a lot of things happening and you are storing the identities in the Azure cloud. So why do we really need to do that? So basically, when you want to add users to your applications, when you want to give personalized experience of your application to the end users, you definitely want to store the users' identities in some way. The traditional way is that you have your own database in which you store the username and the password, maybe in an encrypted form or hashed form, and so on. However, no matter whatever you do with that, it's not easy to do the identity management in a safer way. So it's like writing your own encryption algorithm. No matter how smart you are, there are algorithms and there are people who can break that algorithm easily. So similarly, no matter whatever your precautions you take in storing the identities, it's possible that the data breach may happen. And because people reuse their passwords and you land up your users in a more dangerous situation. So it's a hard thing to do. It's a risky thing to do. So it's always best to delegate this job to someone else, and ADB2C is one tool for that. So there are other services as well, but this is coming from Microsoft, and so ADB2C is one of those services, and it's quite evolving. There are quite huge number of features, as we'll see going forward. Right, so that's about what it is and why do we need this. So I'll just show very quickly one demo of an application that I have running. So this is the a very simple crude React application running. It just has got a one login button and a text and an area for showing user profile. And I will just quickly show what code it is. So this is the code. If you see on this side, it's just one simple a few components like the header part and the token table, which is the user profile table, and button and all that stuff. So not much. There is, if you see, there is no code for doing user logins, authentication, and all that. And we'll actually now see this in action, how it's working. So now if I click on login here, hopefully it's working. It is. Yes. So you see this login screen here. And if you notice very carefully, this login screen is served by the B2C, Active Directory B2C. It's not being served by my application. So if you notice, my application was running on localhost 3000, and when I called that, when I clicked on the login button, it went to the Azure Active Directory and pulled up the login screen. So all this UI and everything is being served by the uh, Active Directory B2C. I already have my user in that application, in that tenant, so I can just sign in. But before I sign in, uh, one thing, a few things to mention. Look at here. Here is a sign up button. So if I click on this, if I'm a new user, I can sign up to this application, and it supports this multi-factor authentication. So if I put in my email address here, and I can send a verification code, and let me try putting in some other email address. And when I do this, it will send me a verification code. And only when I enter the verification code, then I can go down and this will be enabled. And you can also see, so I can create a password here, but you can see some fields or some data that this application is collecting. And this is just a few dummy things like city and country. And country also, if you see, this entire list of countries is there, and the given name, surname. And I just had this is completely up to us as a developer, what fields or what data you want to collect from the user. So that's the sign up. And one more thing I wanted to show you before I, so this, if you see, sign in with your social account. So I had added Twitter as a social account provider. So if I click on this, it will take me to the login screen of Twitter. And then it will ask me, so if you see, this is a Twitter thing, Twitter logo. And this is my, because I'm using Twitter on this browser, it just populated my username and password. So this section, if you see the ADB2C demo app, it has been so some basic description about this app, and few things about what this application will be able to do. So when I click on sign in, it will create a user identity for me using my Twitter credentials. So I don't need to create another password, another account here. We'll come to this little later. And so let me log in with this. There is also this forgot your password thing. So if I click on this, it will take me to a screen to reset my password. So if I click on sign in, now it's actually going to the ADB2C and checking if the user is present, and then coming back to the application and telling the application, look, this user is present there, and this is the data about the user. So when I had done sign up using this email ID, I had given this data about me, given name, city, and all that. So now this application has populated this data about me. And you can see this login button, now it's showing as a logout. So if I click on logout, it will go back to the original screen. So that's a quick, very quick demo, and I'll just go back to the PowerPoint now. So what's next we have, so these are the building blocks. Now before we proceed to talk about this, is there any question or anything that we want to address?
I
I
have a
guess not.
question. I have a
Oh
question
yes.
because I'm not an expert of Azure ADB2C. So I saw that you presented an example with you used Twitter to sign on to
Yes.
create an account. For example, how is the data deletion or updating of data handled in Azure AD B2C? Considering, for example, in Europe, we have the GDPR data policy that the user have the right to delete the data that he or she wants. But
Yes.
how is it handled in B2C?
So if you are using a social identity or a third party identity, then Azure does not store anything about that. It only will store a reference to that it's an external account, and all the account management is the responsibility of that third party. So if you are using Twitter, it's up to Twitter to manage all that. So the Azure does not store any data about you when you're using that.
Okay.
However, if that's this profile data and all that, for example, I had collected the city and country and all that, that is stored in the AD, and that's the responsibility of the application developers to go and delete that. And so
Okay.
that needs to be outside this. There is no, as far as I know, there is no kind of automatic mechanism that when this user is not there, everything will be removed or something. So that's a part of application development more. But if you are using a single sign-on using social, or even you can also use your corporate account. So if you have a customer who is already using Active Directory in their organization, you can have configuration such that they will be able to use their accounts, corporate accounts, to log into your application.
Okay.
So that means then their user accounts are governed by their own IT policies and their own internal things.
Okay. Thank you for that question. So that means, if, for example, if Twitter is compromised, with like hacked or something, like worst case scenario, so that means that
Yes.
it doesn't compromise your Azure AD account in the cloud as well, and other
No.
resources that you
Yes.
have. Okay.
Yes.
Thank
That's
you.
right. That's right.
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you for the
Cool.
answer.
Thank you. So I'll move on. So these are building blocks. So before we actually see how do we create the application, how do we configure it, it's just a few some concepts to know about what. So the first thing that in AD B2C, it starts with something called as AD B2C tenant, that entire outside block that you see. So tenant is a kind of it groups a number of resources, a number of things into one entity in Azure. So you can actually create kind of multiple tenants in Azure with different AD B2C tenants. That's not practically needed, but once you have a tenant, all your applications, users, things related to users, all your sign in policies and the customization, everything is within that tenant. So as many applications you create, you can reuse number of things from the same tenant. So it's kind of grouping different things together. And the first thing that you see in the tenant is something called as app registrations. So app registrations means these are the apps which are your applications, your client applications, or your server applications, API applications, a representation of that in the AD B2C. So we need to register these applications so that these applications can then connect to the AD B2C and get the tokens and do the sign in, sign out, and all other stuff. So otherwise, AD B2C will not know whom to issue the tokens and all that. So when you register app inside the B2C, it actually creates a client ID for that app, and you use that client ID in the application. So when the application is connecting to B2C endpoints, it has to supply that client ID. Then B2C will know, okay, this is this application which is requesting something, and then it will do the further steps. So you can register client applications like a web app or a SPA app or even desktop or mobile. And you can also register API apps if you're having your backend APIs running somewhere else. So once you add these applications, additionally or optionally, you can have the API apps expose certain APIs that you want. So you can literally create that API, that my API is exposing user data, or my API is exposing certain organization level data or something, and then you decide which client app gets access to that API. So you may have an application which is only doing user level things, and you may have another application which is doing admin level things. So you can expose different APIs to these different applications. So it's a kind of role based access permission, role based accounting. However, it's application based more than the user role based. And then you have user accounts stored in there. As we just talked, we can have the user accounts, sorry, the identity providers. You can have the identity providers as local accounts. So the demo I showed using my email address and password, that was a local account. I mean, from in a B2C terminology or AD terminology, it's called as a local account because it stores the username and the password there. Whereas if you have a social accounts, as we mentioned, it just stores a kind of reference, and it records to which social identity provider the login belongs to. So it could be Twitter. So there are a number of identity providers in the AD B2C: Twitter and Facebook, GitHub, or Microsoft account, or some Even you can even create your own custom provider. So suppose you have your customer using auth0 or some other system, as long as that is providing OIDC endpoints, you can create a reference to that also. So it's quite customizable in that sense. And once you have that user accounts and their identity providers configured, so local accounts, email, password, that's a by default configured, but the other social you need to configure on your own. And once you have that, this is something called as then the user flows. User flows means it's a predefined user experience. So if you want to offer sign in flow to the user, sign in experience to the user, or sign up experience to the users. So what we saw just in the demo, sign up, sign in, and all that, that was a user flow actually. So it provides some predefined user flows for sign up, sign in, or combined sign up, sign in, or reset password, edit profile, and so on. And you can even customize that to a quite good extent. So that's the so these three things are the main things: app registrations, the identity providers, and the user flows. And then you can configure the user attributes which are collected during sign up. So attributes are it's information about the user. So we saw this city and job title and given name, some things I had configured to collect. That is something that you can ask your users to provide that data when they are signing up to your application. That attribute you can have the ADB2C return to your application as application claims. That's the terminology again. So they call it as application claim. So you can decide that when a user signs up, you collect maybe name and surname, and you return only the name part to the application as a claim. So that's completely configurable. It depends on your use case. So you can have these claims returned even when the user is editing their profile, for example. And you can do a lot of customization. You can choose your own branding. Right now, the default one that I showed you was having some Azure logo. uh, you can have your own logo, company logo. You can customize this experience, these profiles in multiple languages. I guess there are 36 languages with all predefined translations in there, and you can provide your own translations as well. And you can even add your own language also completely. You can also have
So,
something called as API connectors. So during the sign in, sign up process, you can call your own internal, external backend APIs. So for example, you want to check if the user is there in your backend system, or if there is something that the user has provided some information which is kind of blacklisted in your policies, that you don't want that user to sign up, and so on. You can do a lot more things with that. And even if this is not sufficient, you can do this user flows as a fully custom policies using a specific thing called as identity experience framework. So you need to do a lot of XML configuration, all that. It's a little more involved, but you get a lot of power with that. Right.
Gopal, we have a
Yes.
question here from Gabriel. He asks, how many
Yeah.
users can be supported for authentication? Is there scaling limit in ADB2C?
So no, there is no scaling limit as far as I know. So the basic billing thing is like 50,000 users per month. Up to 50,000 monthly active users, it is free. But there is no limit that they have specified to how many users can be there. And also, the ADB2C is it's globally available. It's a globally distributed thing. So if you have users in different parts of the world, the ADB2C automatically syncs it up to the nearest data center for those users. You don't need to configure that for different geographies, different regions.
Okay, thank you so much.
Right. Okay. Right. So that's about the building blocks. And only one thing, the token issuer. When I said this means that the ADB2C can issue ID tokens and access tokens. So again, this is part of the authentication and authorization. When you use the OIDC, it will issue the ID tokens, which will identify the user in a certain. It's a JWT, so it will identify the users with the JWT claims. and when it issues the access tokens, it will identify the user as well as it will do the what scopes or what permissions this user or this application has got. So you can take that token, go to go to your API, and the API will validate that token and validate the permissions in that token, and then it will respond. Otherwise it will just respond with 401, which is not authorized to access this API. Okay, so that's about the building blocks. Right, how to get started? What is involved in getting the ADB2C up and running? So I will now switch to actually showing the Azure portal, and then we'll see the code. So first, let me show how to create the ADB2C. I'm not going to actually create it. I will just show how to create because it takes a lot of time to spin up the resource. So I already have created that. So first thing is you need to have a valid Azure subscription. Without that ADB2C, you can't have ADB2C just as another portal or something. It's not just independent service, it's within Azure. So you need to have that. And once you are in Azure, you go and click on this create a resource, which is again the standard procedure for creating any resource in Azure. And you search for some terms like B2C or something. So you get this Azure Active Directory B2C. And if you see the basic things here, it's customer identity and access management, all the basic information. And you can, if you can see the plans, the plans is this one: get started today with your free tier of 50,000 monthly active users. And that's quite a good limit for basic application. If you're starting, it's definitely a really um, quite a good number, 50,000 active users. And this is active users, so if a user logs in twice or thrice, it's still considered as one active user. So click on the create, and you actually get two options, and this is slightly confusing, but there is a thing to know. For you first need to do this one: create a new Azure AD B2C tenant, and then you again come back, again go on creating the same process, and then you do the linking. The reason for that is once you create the tenant, actually it becomes an independent resource, because the Azure login that you are doing, that itself is also an active directory. Now you are creating another active directory, so it needs to do little specific things to link that B2C tenant with your subscription. Then it can manage your costing and your billing and all the resource management and everything together. So you need to do this twice. And one more thing is that if you create multiple tenants, maybe for example, you create one for development, one for production, one for testing environment, this 50,000 limit is a combined limit of all the tenants in your subscription. It's not per tenant. That is something to remember. So you may have something like, if you have 5 developers in your team and you want to create 5 tenants for them, the limit actually applies to all these things together. So when you now go and create a new tenant, you will be asked basic information about your organization name, initial domain name. So this domain name is usually like on microsoft.com with your organization name or whatever thing you put. You can choose the nearest region, that's where it will be deployed, but then later on it can get sorry, replicated to different data centers when there is a need. And then you select a subscription for whatever you want to put this B2C inside, and select the resource group existing or create a new one. That's all the standard procedure for creating any bit Azure resource for that matter. And that's it. Then you click on review plus create, and it will start creating the tenant. And once it takes 2 to 3 minutes usually to do that. Once it is done, you will be going to this sort of screen where, sorry, I will just go back to my own main screen. Oh, right, I need to again select this. So I have a number of things here. Let me again. Right. So I had created this tenants. You when you go to that resource, you will get this type of screen, and then you need to click on here to go to the settings. So it's initially when I started, it was little bit confusing because I was not seeing anything here. It is just overview and activity log and all that stuff. So you go here, and this is where all the actions and all the things about B2C come in. It's again taking a while. Sorry to go to this screen. Right, it's coming up. Right, so this is the main AD B2C screen. And the building blocks that we saw, these were the main things. It still has got number of other things, but if you see, I talked about app registrations. There is also this applications, which is a legacy. So one thing to note about AD B2C is that there are a number of things which are evolving, and you will see a lot of things as legacy. Legacy is something that you shouldn't be using. It's an old thing just for compatibility reasons and all that. So do not use this. Use the app registrations. This is where you register your applications. Then the identity providers I talked about. We'll see the screens in a minute. And the API connectors, you can add the API connectors if you want to customize your policies and all that. Company branding, you can add the branding logos and color schemes here. User attributes is where you collect the information about the users.
Hi.
This is
Sorry to. Can
oh
I?
yes,
Is it okay? We have a question
yeah.
from the audience
Hmm.
from Arukia V.
Uh-huh.
He asked, "What is the main difference between Azure AD and Azure B2C?"
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. So as I talked on the first screen, B2C is focused on the consumer applications. I will show in a minute that in practice where that difference actually comes from. But basically, you can expose your applications outside your organizations easily with B2C. That is not something that you can do in the AD. So I'll show that when we actually create an application, or I'll show the process of creating application if that's okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, we have got then the users here, and you can even have different users. And so users here does not necessarily belong the users of your application only. The users are in this Active Directory, which can even maintain the Active Directory and create new applications, like a co-admin thing you can create for your other developers or other people from your organization. And then the user flows here, and identity experience framework, this is where you do full custom policies about the entire user flow. And then there are some things in the preview like authentication methods. So you can add different way to authenticate users using some multi-factor authentication and the authenticator apps and all that. That's a little bit still in preview and a bit advanced. Conditional access, risky user, this is all the security part where you can configure and create policies for banning certain users, or trying to find out if some users credentials have been compromised. So for example, it tracks that if some user has logged in from India today, and suddenly in 2 hours the same user logs in from another part of the world, it will it will flag that. It will not allow that, or it will just ask the user to validate something again, maybe a second factor authentication, because it knows you can't be in India and US within just 2 hours of difference. And you can also configure your password complexities, and you can also configure lockout of accounts. So suppose someone enters password 10 times wrong, the account gets locked out for something like 8 hours, 10 hours, and then the next attempt it locks it for more time, and it goes on exponentially increasing. You can configure all of that in these sections. So we'll just see the app registrations. How do we create app registration? I already have two applications. Again, it takes always a little time to retrieve these applications. I already had registered two applications, one SPA and one API application. I'm not going to cover API part today, but you can name these applications anything. I just named it for reference as SPA. So when you want to register your application, the first thing you do is go and click on new registration, and you give some name to this application. This name is completely internal to B2C. It doesn't have anything to do with your actual app or the title of the app or anything. It doesn't get displayed on your actual running application. And the supported account types, and this is where the question that was just now relates to here. If you see, there are these three options. Who can access this application? Okay, the first option is single tenant. That means whatever Active Directory I have created, if I create the users within this directory, only those users will be able to access it. So this is something like only my internal app and no one else outside my organization. I mean, no one else outside this Active Directory will be able to use this application. That's a very limited thing. But if you want something like admin only, internal only app, which is just doing some management thing or some creation of something, resources and all that, that can be used. The second one is multi-tenant. That means if you have got multiple AD tenants, and it can be AD or AD B2C, either of them actually, then all those users will be able to use this application. The third is the most comprehensive, and this is where it sets apart the AD and AD B2C. This supports these accounts in any identity provider or any organizational directory. So it combines the first two, as well as it opens up your applications for any other identity providers, which could be, as I said, the local accounts. You create just an email and password, or it could be these social accounts like the Google, Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, Microsoft accounts, and all that. That's where this sets it, the B2C, different from the AD. That is focused on the consumer. So now you can have your application and give it to the outside users, ask them to sign up, and let them choose whatever credentials they want to use. They want to use single sign on with their existing account, they can, or they want to create a local account in your tenant, they can do that. Right, so hope that question, that thing is clear with this. And we'll also see the actual user flows in action. Another thing you need to do when you are creating an application app registration here is a redirect URI, which is not a mandatory thing, but especially when you are running an application, what happens is when the user requests a sign in to ADB2C, the ADB2C sees if that user's credentials are valid or does that authentication, and then issues a token to your application that look, this user is valid and this is the token for the user, and this token contains information about this user. uh, the B2C needs to know where to return that. What's your application path, where it is running? So it could be when you are running it in production, it would be your actual URL that you want to receive these tokens. When I'm running locally, I was running it on localhost 3000. That would be the HTTP localhost 3000. So when the sign in happens, it will return to the token to this URL. And this is where you can then start again validating the token and then decoding the token. And this selector here is for web or SPA endpoint, or it just indicates what type of application it is that you are running on this URL. This helps the ADB2C to decide what kind of flow it can support. And again, this is a completely separate discussion about OAuth flows. But if you put a SPA, that by default these SPAs, these are running as client side, and you can't store secrets, passwords inside inside the client side application, because that's not safe. So when you put SPA, it can enable this application for a flow called as authorization code flow with PKCE. And that's a very, again, sounds like a complicated term, but what happens with that is your application goes to ADB2C, it gets an authorization code, then uses the authorization code again to obtain a token, and that happens in the backend. So it is much less riskier than putting actually a password inside the application. Password, when I say password, it's actually the application level ID and secret. So so because we are running SPA, we'll actually be putting the thing here. So again, I'm not going to do that, but I'll show the application which are registered. And other things you can just leave it as it is. This OpenID and offline access, these are the standard scopes for OIDC endpoint for OIDC implementation. And that's it. Your application registration will be created with this. I'll actually show what I had done earlier. This is my application, which is SPA application. And if I go to authentication section here, this is what the redirect URL I had added in it as a single page application, and that was my localhost 3000, right? And now it says here with a green tick mark that this is eligible for authorization code flow with PKCE, right? And logout URL, all that is optional. It could be used for when the user logs out, you may want to redirect them to some other site or something else. Implicit flow and all that, this is a little bit out of scope, this discussion. And the supported account types is the third option that I had selected. Accounts in any identity provider or any organizational directory. And only when you select that third option, you can authenticate user with the user flows. Okay, that's how you create app registration. Now let's see the next step. So yeah, we did these two steps, or I just showed how to do these two steps. The third one is creating the required user flows. So this is the quite interesting part. So go to the user flows, and I had already created this sign up, sign in flow, password reset flow. So the procedure to do that is go and create a new user flow. And as I mentioned, these are the predefined user experience flows, and you get all these different options: sign up, sign in, only sign up or only sign in, or profile editing, password reset. You can create as many flows as you want. The beauty of these things is that once you create this, you can reuse the same flow across different applications. So if you have a web application, you can use the same sign in experience. And if you tomorrow you develop a desktop application, it can still use the same sign in experience. You don't need to do it again for the desktop, again for the mobile and all that, right? So if you look at the sign up, sign in, for example, when you select that, you are asked to select a version. So again, there is a legacy version which is not recommended for new applications. So you select the recommended version and then create that. You give some name to that flow. This name is used in the actual code to refer to this flow. And it will ask you what identity providers you want to provide on this screen. So if we are now using the sign up, sign in, I want to provide local accounts as email sign up, or I want to provide a Twitter, or both. So I can select one of these. And maybe if I select Twitter, that's how, if you remember in the demo, that Twitter button was appearing there, login with Twitter. That's how this will appear. And when I configure multiple identity providers, they will appear here, and you can choose to select a number of them. And the multi-factor authentication, if you remember when we were trying to sign up in my local application, it asked me to verify the code. So you can select by using the email as your second factor. It will send the code as an email, or you can even have a SMS or even a phone call to the number that you provide. It definitely, this is little extra chargeable, whatever the charge are according to the carrier and all that, but you can still do that. And you can also enforce the multi-factor authentication always, or conditional, or off. So conditional means AD-B2C will do a little smart check, and it will enable, ask the user to verify. As I said, if it doubts that the user was in this continent and it's in another continent or something, or the IP address has suddenly changed something, it sometimes will ask that. And then there are other conditional access, is a little advanced setting, usually not needed. And this is the attributes and claims I was talking about. So these are some default things you can ask the user to supply when it is signing up. So this column is collect attributes. It is used to collect information when the user signs up, and when the user signs in, it can return the claim from the user data to your application, so you can use it to display it on your in your UI or use for any other thing. And there are more attributes as well, and you can even add custom attributes. For example, you want to ask the user what's your favorite color or what's your favorite cloud provider, you can do that. So that's how you create a user flow. So once you have created the user flow, once you have created the app registration, you need to take all this information and put it back into your code. So that I will just show that in the code. So the code is actually, it's using a msol React library. So I used that in, if you look at the package.json, these are the libraries that I use. So Azure is providing that msol-react and msol-browser. Both these are required even if you are just doing a React application, because the React library is a kind of wrapper for the browser, so it uses both. And what you do essentially in your index.js, I'm assuming you will be little familiar with the React, but what you do is initially you just create a, you import this public client application because you're using a single page application. Then you have to instantiate a public client application, and you create a new instance of that public client application and provide it your configuration of your Active Directory B2C things, and we'll see what that configuration looks like. So auth config, yeah, so that configuration looks like this: client ID and authority and redirect URI and all that stuff. So client ID is the, sorry, I will just switch back little to the portal. So if you go to the app registrations and go to your SPA client application that you had registered, you see this client ID here. This is a unique ID Azure had generated for this application. You use this and you put it back to your into the code as a client ID. So I had just put it in my environment file. I can actually show the environment file as well. The authority and known authorities, these are usually kind of, it uses your, if you remember when you created tenant, you supplied the organization name. So it uses that. So I'll show that environment file in a moment. The other options are standard ones, just some logging options and all that. So environment file, yeah, here it is. So that's my client ID, which I had created, and the authority is the utility adb2c.b2clogin.com slash that dot on microsoft.com, and then this one is the policy name SUSI, which is sign up sign in policy that I had created in my tenant. So whatever name you use to create your policies, you use that, and the rest of the things are kind of pretty constant using your domain name. And it has got a little bit of different configuration like known authorities and all that. The redirect URI localhost 3000, this has to match exactly what redirect URI you had put in the configuration. And that's it. You just, these are just additional things used for, again, indicating the sign up policy name, edit policy name. So I haven't provided the edit profile etc in this application, but the process is similar. Now when I again go back to index.js, once I create this msol instance using this configuration, what I need to do is wrap my entire application under this provider within this, like msol provider. This is a context provider. So again, if you are familiar with React, you would know the context provider. It's a kind of state management sort of stuff. And that's a thing provided by the React library. So you wrap your entire application and you supply the instance what you created here to that. So what it does is it then uses this instance throughout your application. It's available to all the children components, and in every component you can do things with that instance. You can do login logout, you can check if the user is already authenticated or not, or you can even check the user's ID token and everything in any component in your application. So I will just quickly show a couple of components. So I guess we are now close to the time. So in the app.js, I have few components like header and the intro and main profile. I'll show the header component, which is the top application bar. And here I'm using a hook called as is authenticated. We use is authenticated, that is again supplied by this MSOL React library. So is authenticated is a Boolean variable which will tell if the user has been authenticated or not. So I am just rendering slightly differently. If the so the login logout button, if you remember, so that button is I'm rendering it either as a logout or login depending on the whether the user is authenticated, and I'm supplying different functions for the on-click handlers. So if it is authenticated, it's going to logout handler. If not, it's going to login handler. And how do you actually log in? So it's just single line code here. You just say this instance which was available. So you use this hook called as use msol because you are using the context provider, and then you just call instance.login redirect, or there is also a login pop-up in which the login screen will pop up on the screen rather than redirect. And once that is successful, it's just the instance gets updated with that account, and you can now use it in different parts of the code. So another component that I will show, when you go to this user profile, I'm using another hook, another provider called as authenticated template and unauthenticated template. So that's again provided by the React library. So I can render different components in authenticated if the user is authenticated, and different components if it is not authenticated. So if you remember the profile screen that was there, which was showing the table like name and all that, that's the ID tokens table component. I'm rendering that only within the authenticated template. Otherwise, the sign in to see your profile, that I'm rendering it within unauthenticated template. So that is how you get it executed. So if you see, the code is not really too complicated. You just use some hooks. So if you're having basic familiarity with React, you just use some hooks and context and you're good to go. And similar, if you're familiar with JavaScript, you can use the JavaScript library or the .NET library and so on. So that's how you, yeah, that's how you do this configuration, right? I think right, I think I'm done with this basic demo. If we are good on time, can I take 5 more minutes to talk about this?
Yes, that's fine. Go ahead.
All right. So what more you can do with the ADB2C? As I said, you can authenticate downstream web APIs which are running in your backend. So we just saw just sign in, sign out, but if you get the access token, you can use that and call your web APIs. Customized user experience. As I said, you can do multiple languages, branding, and you can even provide your own HTML layout. You're not necessarily kind of fixed on using whatever the B2C is providing. You just provide a HTML file and it can display that. And even long languages also. Custom attributes, different types of data you can collect. API connectors. So during this flow at different stages, you can call different APIs before the user is authenticated, after it's authenticated, and so on. Full custom policies. You can completely customize your user experience, that I want to show this first and that first, and then that happens. All these things you can put on your own. Adding even custom identity providers. That also you can do. As I said, you can add different identity providers. And finally, you can even do user management with the Graph API. You don't have to call every time, do it via UI. So if you want to use some kind of bulk user migration or create the users, edit the users from your different application, you can do that also using the Graph API. So I'll just show these screens very quickly. That can give an idea about what it is like. So if you look at this branding stuff, sorry, what happened? All right, you go to this configuration thing. Right. So if you go here, and so this is the sign up sign in policy, and if you look at the page layouts here, you see these different pages used in different things. So local account sign up pages, so you can configure if you want to use a custom page, and by default they have got some versions of the page that they offer, but if you say yes, you provide the URL of your sign up page. That's how. Then if you provide some HTML here, it has to be on HTTPS, you can't just upload any file, then it will serve that page. And also if you go to languages, you see there are so many languages available, and you can configure any of these language, and you can even add custom language, and so on. And you can even upload your own translations also when you select a certain language. That's the language and the
Uh,
identity providers. So
Just
if
a
you see
question,
this,
just a
yeah,
question, Gopal, because it's also said run the user flow. So can you test the user flow from here within the Azure portal?
yes, so that's a bit of, yeah. So what you need to do for that, we can definitely run the user flow. For example, so I will show that. Let's say I'll select the client application, and I can select a redirect URL that I had added, and I'll just leave the access token. And if I click on run the user flow, so if I'm doing some customization, this is without even having my application code, I can just see how the screen appears. And if I sign in, it will try to go back to the localhost 3000. If that app is not running, it will just show some error. But there is even other way, that there is something called a jwt.ms. So you can get these tokens, whatever the ID tokens that you get from the sign in, and it will go back to jw2.ms. This is the jw2.ms, and it will populate the token, and you can actually see whether the user is configured properly or not. So that's actually a good quick way to test the users. Sorry, test the sign in or sign up flows. Right. And if we look at the identity providers, there are these many identity providers available. So you can configure, I mean, have the users use their Amazon account or Apple account, Facebook, GitHub, Google, LinkedIn, and so on. I had used this Twitter, so that's why it's appearing here. And you can even add a new custom OpenID Connect provider. So you need to get all this metadata, URL, client ID, secret, and a number of things from that custom provider, but you can do that. And if you look at the API connectors, so if you create API connectors, you have to provide again HTTPS URL where your API is running, and then provide the username, password, or a certificate which the API will recognize and respond. And then once you configure these connectors, you can go back to the user flows and configure that user flow to use that particular API. And the branding we just saw. Yeah, the user attributes. So these are the default user attributes that it provides: city, country, display name, email address, etc. But if you go on click in on add, you can provide, let's say if I want to do something like favorite cloud, and I can provide a string or boolean or int. And if I provide a string, or either way, I can provide what values may appear as a drop down there somewhere else when I after I create that. So I can provide something like Amazon AWS or Google GCP, or and Microsoft Azure as a predefined selectable values there. If I look at the users, I can actually see which users are there in this tenant. So I currently have only one. If you see here, this is my main account that I'm using, and the source is external directory because my account actually belongs to another subscription, another thing. But this gmail.com address is what I had signed up from my application, and that's a member of this directory. So, and I can go on click and try to see the data for this user, and even revoke their sessions if they are logged in, if you want to do that, and so on. There are multiple things with the users. If I go back again, right, identity experience framework, that's a bit full custom policies. You need to upload certain documents and policies in that. Right, that's it. I think we are already over time. If there are any questions I can take, or if you're interested, I can show quickly how to add the social identity provider GitHub.
Hi, thank you,
Yeah,
Gopal, for the presentation. I hope the we learned. I learned a lot, and I hope the audience that are watching us live as well have learned something. It's interesting. There are a lot of things. I list down a lot of questions, but we're out of time, so I will
right.
contact you.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Yes.
Yeah,
So here,
actually, yeah. uh,
yes, so here is a comment here or a question from the audience. It's Salim who says, "Could you please share a PDF version of the presentation, project files, and the link to the recordings?"
yeah, links will share definitely.
Hmm.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I have. So this code, what I have shown just now, that's there on my GitHub, and I also have a few blog posts. So and there are I think three blog posts which are just doing small things. So I covered a lot in this 1 hour. This actually is part of three different blog posts on my blog, and I have put in all of screenshots and instructions how to do that. So that link also we can share. I think once you go to that link, I think that will be maybe it will help. And if still audience or anyone has any questions, you can reach out to me on Twitter or on my blog. Also, there is a comment section. You can put some comments, and I can get back
Yes,
on
I
there.
have a. I have. Do you have any recommendation for learning resources to those that are new in Azure AD B2C?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, and I forgot to move to that slide. So there is this documentation links I have. So the first thing I would always do is go to Microsoft documentation, B2C documentation. It's quite comprehensive now, and they are adding a lot of stuff. From that, there are multiple again sublinks there. They have put in a number of samples as well on their GitHub, and you can get almost all different scenarios covered there. And then this identity platform documentation. So identity platform is a combination of all these things: Active Directory and the MSAL library and a few other stuff. And the MSAL in particular, the JavaScript library, which is also there for this React, Angular, and all that, that also has got I mean, it's an open source, so you get even all the source code, but there are a number of examples there. There are these code samples on this link. And one thing I will recommend is this Twitch live show put up by a couple of Microsoft guys, and they're really great. I think they do weekly stream 1 or 2 hours, and that's a great one. 425 show. And my own shameless way to put myself. This is my blogs and my code. This one is particular code for this sign in sign out code that I just showed. I'm also planning to put up on code for and blog post for accessing APIs, protecting your APIs using these tokens. That's halfway done. I think in next 2-3 days I should be putting it up on my blog as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Great resources. I myself is planning to try this on .NET, so I will use your
Yes.
code as an inspiration. We
Yeah.
have feedback from one of our audience, Gabriel.
Okay. Okay.
Very good presentation, Gopal. Thank you, and very clear.
Thank you.
So
That I'm glad.
thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you, Gabriel. Cool. Yeah, I
Yes.
hope. Yeah, I appreciate. There's a lot to cover. Identity itself is really vast topic. We were talking about earlier about Azure is vast. Within Azure, if you take identity, that's another vast topic.
Mm.
So
Mm.
as much as you dig into that, it goes on to you will get onto infinite loops. But it's enjoying. It's really powerful and quite great stuff.
Mm. You were mentioning here in the beginning of your talk, you were talking about this polywork network.
Yes.
So yes.
So
Mm.
yeah, I will show my Polyur profile, I guess.
Yes.
So it's hang on a moment. Yeah, that's how
Yes.
it looks like. So you see, I can add some badges, what I'm learning, and so on, and a description about me and my earlier profile and what I'm working on, what I. So I added this lightning talk that I had given a while ago, and few other. So if I wrote a blog post, I can kind of use it as a diary. That's a good one. So I can share some invite codes. I will leave it to you, Jonah, how to share that with the audience.
Mhm.
I have some
Yes.
invite codes which maybe you can share it offline later, or
Yeah,
how
I
do you
can
want to
do
do that?
that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Mm.
So our time is like out, but I wish we had more time. But thank you so much,
Yeah.
Gopal, for being here. A lot of interesting stuff and yeah, great information.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It was great to talk, and
Yes.
hopefully, yeah, it was helpful.
Yeah.
And
And
also thank you so much to the audience who have been watching
yes.
this
Yes.
either live or if you watch the recording afterwards. And
Yes.
also you can see now in our outro clip, you will see a QR code so that you can get to our call for paper. So if you want to also speak at our user group, you can just go to that call for paper and add a submission. And even don't be afraid if this is your first time talking, don't be afraid. So me and Jonah will be able to help you and coach you into both finding a topic and also help you with the practicalities of your talk.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So thank you so much, everyone, and happy weekend to all of
Yeah.
you that's
Yeah.
watching.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
again,
Thank.
everyone. It's
Yeah.
okay,
Have a
so
great
see you.
day.
Yes.
okay.
See you
Bye.
again next time. Bye bye.